You know, for almost 2 decades now, Europe has been lurching from one crisis to another. It feels like a constant cycle of booms and busts. But what if these crises weren't just random bad luck? What if they were the totally predictable result of one specific policy choice? Well, today, we're diving into a critique from the Austrian School of Economics that claims it has the answer.
So here's the central puzzle, right? Before 2008, countries like Spain and Ireland were absolutely on fire, while Germany's economy was kind of sluggish. After the big financial crisis, the roles completely flipped. The South stagnated, but Germany suddenly took off, especially in real estate. So how on earth could the exact same monetary policy from the very same central bank create such wildly different and sequential outcomes?
All right, here's our game plan. First, we're going to unpack the core economic theory behind this argument. Then we'll see how it explains that huge boom in the South. After that, we'll look at the ECB's response to the crisis, the, let's say, unintended consequences, and finally, the author's pretty stark warning for all of Europe.
Okay, so to really get a grip on this whole argument, we first need to understand the tool being used to analyze it. It's called the Mises-Hayek overinvestment theory, and it gives us a very specific framework for thinking about these economic cycles. So, at the very heart of this theory is a concept called the natural rate of interest. Just think of it like the perfect Goldilocks price for money. It's the rate where the amount people want to save lines up exactly with the amount businesses want to invest for the future. When you're at this rate, the theory says, the economy grows sustainably. It's the benchmark.
So, here's the crucial part. What happens when a central bank steps in and sets its official interest rate below that natural rate? Well, according to this theory, it sends a completely false signal throughout the economy. It's like a mirage. It makes capital seem way cheaper and more abundant than it actually is, and that tricks businesses into starting all sorts of projects that in the long run just aren't sustainable.
And this kicks off a very predictable cycle. First, those super low rates fuel a massive credit-driven boom. Money's cheap, investment goes through the roof. But here's the catch. Because this boom isn't based on real savings, it ends up creating inflation. To get that inflation under control, the central bank has no choice but to raise rates. And suddenly, all those projects that only made sense with cheap money go belly up. The boom turns into a bust.
Now, what's really fascinating here, according to the source, is that modern central banks have a bias. They don't treat the booms and the busts equally. They are incredibly quick to slash interest rates the second a crisis hits, but they're way more hesitant, much slower, to raise them during the good times. This creates what's called an asymmetric policy, and it's pushed global interest rates on a steady downward slide for decades.
All right, so we've got the theory. Now let's apply this lens to the first part of our story, that absolutely massive boom that happened in Europe's periphery before the 2008 meltdown.
Back in the early 2000s, the European Central Bank set one low interest rate for the entire Eurozone. But, and this is key, national governments went in completely opposite directions. You got Germany, still dealing with the cost of reunification, hitting the brakes on spending. At the exact same time, countries in the periphery saw their tax revenues balloon because of the boom, and they went on an absolute spending spree.
This whole situation created what the author calls a waterbed effect, which is a perfect analogy. Imagine pushing down on one end of a waterbed. The water has to go somewhere, right? It bulges up on the other side. With Germany saving and restricting spending, all that cheap money being pumped out by the ECB didn't stay there. It got pushed out, flowing south and west, adding even more fuel to the fire in those periphery countries.
And this chart, wow, it really shows you the staggering scale of this split. Just look at the growth in government spending. Between 1999 and 2007, spending in the countries that would later face a crisis grew so much faster than in Germany. We're not talking about a tiny gap here. This was a fundamental economic divergence right in the heart of the Eurozone.
So, what do you get when you mix all that together? Well, the outcome was exactly what the theory would predict. These massive, unsustainable booms in things like real estate, all financed by capital flowing in from the north. This created enormous imbalances, where some countries were basically spending way more than they were producing, and it was setting the stage for an inevitable crisis.
Of course, that party couldn't last forever. When the global financial crisis hit in 2008, the music just stopped. So now, let's take a look at how the European Central Bank responded to the chaos.
And the response was just a rapid-fire escalation of measures that were totally unprecedented. First, interest rates were slammed down to basically zero. Then came programs to buy up government bonds. Then, in 2012, came that famous whatever-it-takes promise to save the euro.
And finally, a massive full-scale asset purchase program we all know as quantitative easing, or QE.
One of the key side effects of all these bailouts shows up in something called the Target 2 system. You can think of it like the Eurozone's internal accounting ledger, a giant IOU system between national central banks. And as you can see, countries like Germany became huge creditors in this system, while countries like Italy and Spain became massive debtors. This is literally the financial footprint of all that rescue money flowing across borders to keep the whole thing from falling apart.
Now, from the perspective of this Mises-Hayek theory, this is the ultimate irony. This classic quote from Hayek really captures the author's core critique, that the ECB's attempt to fix the crisis by flooding the system with even more cheap credit was basically trying to cure the disease with more of the very poison that caused it in the first place.
So what happened after this cure was administered? Well, according to this analysis, it created two very different and equally dangerous problems in the north and south of Europe.
In the crisis countries, the policy is said to have created what economists call zombie companies. These are firms that are effectively bankrupt but are kept staggering along just because credit is so cheap. They can't really grow or innovate, they just shuffle on, tying up precious capital and labor that could have been used by healthier, more productive companies. They drag the whole economy down.
And you can see the effect of this zombification right here in the data. After the crisis, investment as a share of the economy totally cratered in Spain. The argument is that the ECB's cheap money wasn't fueling a real recovery, it was just propping up these unhealthy companies, preventing the economy from actually healing and retooling for the future.
And this chart, this shows you the other side of the coin. While the South was stagnating, all that cheap money had to go somewhere. And where did it go? To the perceived safe haven, Germany. So the very same policy that was preventing a recovery in Spain was now fueling a massive real estate boom in Germany, basically starting the whole cycle all over again, just in a new place.
So all of this leads to the author's really stark warning about where this cycle of booms, busts, and bailouts is taking the entire European project.
The whole critique really boils down to three key points. First, the ECB's one-size-fits-all policy helped create that initial bubble in the South. Second, its crisis response is now preventing a real recovery by zombifying those economies. And third, those same policies are now creating a new and potentially just as dangerous bubble in Germany.
And look, this isn't just some academic debate about economics. The author argues that this whole policy cycle creates very real and very dangerous political consequences. It creates winners and losers, it fuels resentment between creditor and debtor nations, and it increases inequality, which ultimately threatens the long-term political stability of the European Union itself.
Which leaves us with a final and pretty provocative question. If this analysis is right, then the Eurozone is trapped in a vicious cycle where the cure for one crisis just lays the groundwork for the next one. So if that's true, what comes next for Europe? And is there any way out?